at the top are the Detroit Lions, who were 15-2 this year, just the best season in the history of the Lions, and they went into the playoffs. Jack, you were on them the entire season as unbeatable, basically, and I couldn't blame you, honestly. As we got into the playoffs, they looked like a team that was just destined to go to, and if not go to, win the Super Bowl. But then, because they're the Lions, because they're cursed, Jaden Daniels comes in, a rookie quarterback, goes into their home building and beats them. And now you're in an offseason where there are some needs that have to be addressed. It's a great team that'll probably be very good again next season, but you never know if you just captured lightning in a bottle. So Ziggy, I'll go to you first here. What went wrong here for Detroit? What was the biggest, this was our problem on the 2024 season? And I think I know what you're going to go with.
I mean, if you're asking for the single biggest thing that went wrong for this Lions team, I think there's only one answer you can give, and that's the injuries. I know that the offense had a bad performance in the game against the Commanders, and that's true. But all season long, the thing that made things the hardest for this Lions team was injuries on the defensive side of the ball. And you have to wonder if you've got a better defense in that game. I mean, it's hard to ask like what went wrong in the regular season. When you win 15 games, the answer is absolutely nothing, really. But the injuries had to matter. If they have a few more cornerbacks, if the linebackers are healthy, if Aiden Hutchinson is in, like this Lions defense was ravaged by injuries. And even though it's disappointing to say something that wasn't your fault and there's really nothing you can do to improve was the biggest problem, at least you'll probably be luckier next year on the injury front. But the single biggest problem for this team, I think there's no doubt about it. Injuries.
Isn't it crazy to think how good this team would have been if everyone was healthy? Like, it wasn't just that they had a bunch of injuries and they had issues with depth. It was like
Hutchinson.
Yeah, it was like Hutchinson was leading the league in sacks for weeks after he got hurt. He was having an all-time.
He could have gotten. I mean, he had 8 sacks in 5 games.
Yeah, he was off to an unbelievable start. Sorry, Jack, you were saying?
Oh, yeah, also too, and yeah, I thought the Lions were going to win the Super Bowl, like for most of the year, at least get there. Oh, they were the best team in the NFC all year, but the last couple of years, you have to realize that the regular season and the playoffs is literally 2 separate seasons. And a lot of the time we don't see regular season success carry over. Like even last year with the Lions, struggled at home against the Rams in the first round. It took it was a scrappy game by the Bucs in the divisional round. Like the Bucs could have beat them too. It's an entirely new season. And a lot of the time when, you're a team with the slightly worse quarterback in a do or die game, like essentially week 1, like this is a fight to the death. It's tough to say like, okay, this team was 15-2, number 1 seed. Let's gift them the path to the Super Bowl. Like absolutely not. And that's where I get mistaken. Like this is a brand new season. Jaden Daniels was awesome.
That's a good point.
This Commanders team looked like world beaters in that game. 45 points?
Yeah,
but it's also easier to look like you have the better quarterback when the other team has 4 defensive ends on IR, 3 defensive tackles on IR, 2 starting linebackers on IR, 4 cornerbacks on IR. That's an entire starting defense right there. And most of those guys were starters. Like, you look at some of the big free agent acquisitions that were supposed to make a big difference, right? Guys like Marcus Davenport, Carlton Davis, they weren't there, and they were playing well up until that point in the season. But when you've got an entire starting defense on IR, I mean, Jack, you might have looked like a good quarterback out there.
Jack I'd look good regardless.
You would have looked like Jay Daniels.
Oh, yeah, I'm not downplaying injuries at all. I think that is probably the biggest.
Well, I think you're right, too, though. And it's not a diss on Jared Goff at all. Like, Jay Daniels just was playing some of the best football in the league, and you saw, I think that we probably should have been more aware of this going into the playoffs, or a lot of the people who were picking Detroit, you kind of could see that something like this could happen, especially after they played the Bills. And, in the playoffs, you're going to be playing the best offenses in the league. And Buffalo had no problem at all moving up and down the field on Detroit. Basically, no team did at the end of the year other than the Vikings. And even the Vikings, if you go back and watch that game, the Vikings were living on the 5-yard line. They just couldn't get in the end zone. They kept making mistakes. The Vikings put the ball in the end zone. They actually probably win that game. So I feel like you could see it coming for Detroit, but because they won that game the way they did against the Vikings, and because they were so good all regular season, 15-2, the Detroit story, the comebacks, it felt like they were inevitable.
That's what got me back on board. Was the Week 18 win? Was it?
And it was a little misleading.
It was a 20-point win against Minnesota.
It was a little misleading because again, the Vikings I thought were playing better, just not being able to get in the end zone, and Darnold was having his worst game of the year. And then they blew us out.
That Vikings team was.
Yeah.
We'll get there in a little bit.
But then they blew us out in the fourth quarter, and it looked like they kicked our ass, which in the fourth quarter they did. But that might have been, for Detroit fans, a false sense of security about what this team actually was. And it was a great team, a great season. The offense was unstoppable. It's just when you have those injuries that you're talking about, Ziggy, when you face a good offense, it was bound to happen.
Well, yeah, there's two numbers that define this game for the Lions. One was 3 for 4, how the Commanders did on fourth down. If the Lions stop just 1 or 2 of those, it's a different game. And the second, of course, is 5 turnovers, right? 3 Jared Goff interceptions. If you're consistently letting your opponent convert on fourth down and you're turning the ball over a lot, there's very little you can do. So look, as we look forward to this Lions season and what's coming next, I think the injuries are going to get better. Jared Goff will still have a couple stinkers next game, but hopefully they won't be so poorly timed. I mean, it's true. Every year, Jared Goff's due for a couple bad games. Every Lions fan can admit it. Most players are. You just can't have 20 defensive injured players and Jared Goff turn the ball over 4 times against an elite offense. That's just not going to work. And the game was still closer than it should have been, given all of that. Right? The way I describe it, it sounds like the Lions would have lost by 40, like the Commanders lost to the Eagles. Not quite what happened.
So they go into this offseason, and it'll be interesting to see what happens because Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson were 2 coordinators who everyone's been talking about for years now as being 2 of the best coordinators in the league. Aaron Glenn goes to the Jets. Ben Johnson goes to the Bears. We'll get to them in a little bit. And now Dan Campbell has to build up his new staff. And I think that there's a lot of question marks about will this defense be able to pick up from where they left off this season? And when healthy, the Lions defense was great this year. That's a huge roles that need to be filled. And I think you're going to see that Dan Campbell, he's more of a motivator. Like, he's still a great coach, but he's more of the motivating type head coach. I'm excited to see how does this Lions offense look with a new guy in. And like if the Bears take off on offense, it's probably more Ben Johnson. Like, there are question marks that need to be answered there. So Ziggy, let me ask you real quick. Between the coordinators, let's say like cornerback and I don't know, maybe edge rusher, like what do you think is the biggest actual need for them to address?
People have talked a lot about the coordinators, and there have been plenty of Packers fans in our comments saying now Dan Campbell is actually going to have to coach. He's not going to be able to coast on the coordinators,
which is wrong.
I think that's crazy. The hardest part of being an NFL head coach, without question, is building a strong team culture and a team that consistently competes. We've seen so many brilliant coordinators be completely unable to institute their offense or their defense where they go because they just can't get a team around them. On the other hand, I know schematic stuff is important, but plenty of that comes from Dan Campbell. It's not like he's sitting on the sidelines, like drinking a beer while the team's planning how to play the game. He's involved in every room. You can tell that some of the trick plays come from, like, a lot of the stuff this Lions team is known for comes from him. The hope is that he's like a John Harbaugh type, right? A guy who establishes a great team culture and can bring in coordinators when he needs. So I'm not so worried about that. I mean, I think the biggest need for this team is edge rusher still. They've tried bringing in a lot of complementary guys. This year it was Davenport and Zadarius Smith. And I'm not saying those guys are bad, but you saw just how good this defensive line can be when you can get consistent pressure on the other side of Hutchinson. And if you could get a guy who's even better than Zadarius Smith, even better than Marcus Davenport, which is not like a crazy ask, that's not impossible. That defensive line, I think, could be one of the best in the NFL.
Could you imagine?
On the other hand, if you can't, you're going to be wheeling out like a 35-year-old who's hoping that they can take care of business.
Well, then you're the best.
Yeah.
Ziggy, I coached my 8th graders last week at a basketball game, and I actually cracked open a beer on the sideline while I was coaching. And you know what the final score of that game was?
What?
We won 71-25. Buzz coaching. You know how they say buzzed driving is drunk driving? You shouldn't do it. Buzzed coaching is good coaching. You should do it. Buzz Jack was good on that sideline. He was getting his players into it.
Could Max Crosby be a potential a potential guy they go after? Probably not. I don't think they can make it work.
For sale.
I don't think he is either. But could you imagine? I know Lions fans are talking about it. Just imagine for a second what Max Crosby and Aiden Hutchinson would look like. Like that actually might be lethal.
Oh, it's almost as good as Watt and Highsmith.
Yeah, no, it's a good combination. But yeah,
that would be the best duo in the NFL, right?
Ziggy, come on,
Second best.
How could it not? Aiden Hutchinson and Max
Crosby. If one of those guys missed
Crosby.
half the season, it would be the best duo in the NFL.
Yeah, that would. I'm serious when I say if they were able, and it's probably not possible, but if they brought in Max Crosby, they would obliterate people.
We're honest on this show. We don't lie to people. You're going to see a lot of Packers media, a lot of Packers podcasters saying Max Crosby is the number one opportunity. Mark Davis has been very clear that he loves Max Crosby and will not let him go. Hiring Pete Carroll and
they're not letting
having Pete Carroll turn to Max Crosby and say, go get your guys, while Max Crosby sort of smiles and starts nodding his head. Like, Pete Carroll loves defensive linemen. He's going to give, like, it's going to be a different system in Vegas. There's no way on earth that Max Crosby is leaving the Raiders this season.
Here's what I'll wrap it up with, just kind of blasting through the some of the needs real quick, and then we'll move on to the Vikings in second here. Cornerback, I thought Terry and Arnold had his ups and downs this year, and with Carlton Davis leaving, that room, despite Amik Robertson having the game of his life against Justin Jefferson, of course, and actually it wasn't even the game of his life, it was Sam just being so damn bad. They do need to address cornerback a little. That was a unit that struggled. I think with DJ Reader, with Ali McNeil and Hutchinson, if you could get that fourth edge rusher, that fourth player there, you're in great shape on the D line. Maybe a little depth, but this is a team that doesn't have too many holes. They more needs just support. I mean, the best safety duo in football. And then go get a guard to replace Graham Glasgow, and they should be in good shape. They should be back. Like, what do you put their panic meter at going into next year? Like a 3,
0,
2?
Yeah, like 1.
Right? There's not much.
You've got like 3 needs, $50 million in cap space,
Tons
all
of
your
cap
draft
space.
picks, a great quarterback, a good defense when it's healthy. Like, maybe it's a 2 just because you wonder if Dan Campbell's going to melt down, but he's not. You know what to do.
That's the hope. Look, that's the hope. The hope is that Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson were guiding this ship, and that Campbell has no idea what he's doing, but that's obviously not the case. So the Lions are in great shape.